Today, your job dictates your medical coverage. Lose your job, and you lose your doctor. We complain about deductibles, networks, and surprise bills, but rarely ask the obvious question. Why does your employer have anything to do with your healthcare in the first place? Your boss doesn't buy your groceries or pick your car insurance, yet they serve as the gatekeeper to your physical health. The craziest part? This was never the plan. During World War II, the government froze wages to fight inflation. Desperate to attract workers, employers offered health insurance instead, and the tax code made it cheap to do so. A temporary wartime workaround became a permanent national habit. So how did a rule designed to fight inflation end up deciding if you can afford surgery today? To understand that, we have to go back to a time when health insurance barely existed. In the 1920s and 30s, employer health insurance wasn't a concept. You got sick, you went to the doctor, and you paid out of pocket. That was the entire system. Medicine itself was vastly different. There were no MRIs, organ transplants, or $80,000 specialty drugs advertised during football games. Doctors made house calls, and hospitals were often seen as a last resort. While a major illness could still devastate a family financially, healthcare hadn't yet become a giant, complex financial machine. Early insurance looked more like prepaid membership. In the late 1920s, a Dallas hospital offered school teachers a deal. Pay a small monthly fee and your future hospital care is covered. It was simple and local, and it eventually became the Blue Cross. Then the Great Depression hit. Millions lost their savings. Patients couldn't pay their bills. Hospitals struggled to stay open. The healthcare system desperately needed stable funding. Suddenly, turning unpredictable massive medical bills into predictable monthly payments looked incredibly attractive to both patients and doctors. But even then, employer-provided coverage wasn't the default. That would take a war. By 1942, the United States had transformed into the industrial engine of the Allied war effort. The country was building ships, tanks, guns, aircraft, ammunition, engines, uniforms, radios, and military equipment on a scale almost impossible to imagine. Car factories became tank factories. Consumer manufacturers became defense contractors. Entire towns were reorganized around production. America was becoming the arsenal of democracy. But there was a huge problem. At the exact moment the country needed more workers than ever, millions of men were leaving the civilian workforce to go fight overseas. Factories needed labor. Steel mills needed labor. Aircraft plants needed labor. Everyone was hiring. The normal solution would have been obvious: raise wages. If Boeing needs workers, Boeing pays more. If a shipyard needs welders, it pays more. If a steel mill is desperate, it offers higher wages and steals people away from the factory down the road. This is how labor markets usually work. But Washington saw danger in that. If every employer started bidding up wages during wartime, prices could spiral out of control. Higher wages would lead to higher costs. Higher costs would lead to higher prices. During a war, inflation was not just an economic inconvenience. It was viewed as a literal threat to the entire war effort. The government needed the production to increase without the economy overheating. So the federal government stepped in and imposed wartime wage controls. Employers were restricted in how much they could increase pay. That created a strange situation. Companies desperately needed to compete for workers, but they could not simply offer bigger salaries. Imagine trying to hire thousands of people while being told you're not allowed to win by paying more. So employers started searching for another way. If they could not increase wages directly, they would increase compensation indirectly. And that is where the loophole opened. Employers started offering benefits: vacation time, pensions, paid leave, perks, and increasingly, health insurance. These benefits were valuable to workers, but they were not treated exactly like ordinary wages. So companies could use them to compete. Instead of saying, "We will pay you more than the factory next door," an employer could say, "Come work here, and we will help you cover your medical bills. We will protect your wife, we will protect your children, and we will give your family security." Remember, this was a time when medical insurance was still not universal. A job that came with health coverage stood out. For workers with families, it was a serious advantage. And for companies, it solved a recruiting problem. They could not legally raise wages beyond the limits, but they could make the job more attractive through fringe benefits. This was one of those moments in history where nobody fully understands what they are creating when they're creating it. To the employer, health insurance was just a way to get workers into the factory. And to the worker, it was just a nice benefit during a stressful time. To the government, it was a tolerated workaround that helped production continue. But together, they were laying the foundation for a system that would dominate American healthcare for the next century. Then came the decision that made the whole thing stick. There was a question though, and that question was simple. If your employer pays for your health insurance, should that count as taxable income? Because if your employer gives you money, you pay income tax on it. But what if your employer gives you health insurance? Is that income? The answer that emerged was no. Employer-paid health insurance would not be treated as taxable income for workers. That sounds like a tiny technical decision, but it was not. It was one of the most important tax advantages in American history. Think about it this way. If your employer gives you an extra $5,000 in salary, you do not actually keep $5,000. Taxes take a piece. But if your employer spends $5,000 on your health insurance, you get the value of that benefit tax-free. That means $1 of health insurance through work is actually worth more than $1 of wages. Suddenly, the tax code was pushing everyone toward employer-sponsored health insurance. Workers liked it because they gave them an after-tax value. Employers liked it because it helped them recruit and retain employees. Obviously, insurance companies liked it because employers could enroll large groups of workers all at once. And the government, whether intentionally or not, had created a giant subsidy for getting health insurance through your job. This is the moment where the loophole became more than a wartime trick. It became an economic machine. Because once tax incentives get built into the system, behavior changes around them. Companies built benefit departments. Insurance companies built group plans. Workers began expecting health coverage as part of compensation, and unions began negotiating for better benefits. And year by year, the connection between employment and healthcare became stronger. When World War II ended, a lot of temporary wartime policies faded away, but employer-sponsored health insurance did not. That is the strange part. The original conditions that created the system were temporary. The wage controls were temporary. The labor shortage was connected to the war, and the emergency was supposed to end. But by the time the war was over, too many people liked the new arrangement. Workers did not want to give up their insurance, and employers did not want to lose a powerful recruiting tool, and insurance companies had built an entire business around group coverage. Unions saw health benefits as something they could bargain for. Politicians had very little interest in taking away something families had grown attached to. So, the workaround survived. And in the post-war boom, it exploded. The American economy after World War II was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Factories were humming, suburbs were expanding, and the middle class was growing. Large companies offered stable jobs with benefits. Union power was strong, and corporate America was building the image of the secure middle class. You got a job, you bought a house, you raised a family, your employer provided health insurance. That became the American model. By the 1950s and the 1960s, employer-sponsored health insurance was not some unusual perk. It was becoming normal. This is also when America quietly took a different road from many other developed countries. After World War II, several nations moved toward government-run or universal healthcare systems. They treated healthcare as something organized nationally. America went in another direction. The United States had a growing private employer-based system. Millions of workers were being covered through their jobs. So instead of replacing that system, America just built around it. That is why the American healthcare system feels so patched together. It was not designed from scratch. It was built in layers. Employer insurance for workers, Medicare for the elderly, Medicaid for the poor, veteran systems, individual markets, COBRA, exchanges, subsidies, networks, deductibles. It is not one clean system. It is a historical pileup. And the biggest layer began with wartime wage controls.